Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carol. I did ask her to say that, so thank you. But congratulations to all of you for finding your way into the greatest panel of AWE. I can guarantee you're going to have a great time here because we have three of the most creative minds I've ever had the pleasure to have met. And so buckle up. It's going to be a good panel, I hope. But first, I just want to thank Carol again, and Sonia and Ori. This is the 15th anniversary, I think, of AWE. It started in 2010. So it's an amazing event. I hope you're all enjoying it. It's great that there is a moment for XR like this, for everyone to come together. So thanks to Sonia and to Ori for that. And so I'll just introduce our panelists. I'm Eric Oldrin. I'm a director at Nerdlo Studio. And we're a creative innovation studio building AI film, XR experiences, really looking at emerging platforms and building proof of concept for those spaces for platforms and also bringing brands and original content. So that's kind of what I'm up to. But let me introduce the rest of these folks here. So we have with us Bob, Karen, and Eric, who are all, as I said, great creative minds. And then first up is Bob Bjarke, who's a creative director at Electric Factory. And I'll let him introduce himself.
Cool. Yeah, I'm Bob. I am a creative director at the Electric Factory. That is true. I have a background in traditional creativity, so I was at ad agencies for many years, like Leo Burnett, Team One, and others. And at the Electric Factory, we built a lot of immersive technology experiences in AR, VR, and increasingly in AI.
So this is Bob's stuff.
Yeah, you can see more of my dumb face on this screen. And like I said, I really like to prototype a lot, so I'm always building in AR or VR. I've been playing a lot with Snap Spectacles in the last 6 months or so. And we can talk through some of these examples more as we go, but I just think it's hugely important for creative people to get their hands dirty and stuff and start to prototype and build as much as you can so you can understand the technology and have better ideas.
Great. Next slide. So Bob is a creative muse of mine, always tinkering and building. And then Kaz, Maurice O'Leary, here is an innovation muse from Verses in Valleys.
Hello. Nice to have you all in the room today. I followed a traditional path as Bob. So started off as a creative director in advertising world, owned an agency, sold an agency, have done a lot of installation art, which is where I find I get a lot of my learnings to take into the immersive space. Truly understanding how people interact with the physical structure gives me so much real data on how to build. From there, I put it all into technology world and worked for Meta for half a decade and pioneered the first wave of creator-led brand worlds for Meta Horizons. So back in the wild days, pre-legs, if there's anyone who was building pre-legs, there we go. There was just so much creativity. I love being on that cusp to work out where things are. I'm also a public speaker on human connection and innovation because I feel you must be out there living in the world to know how to build for it really well. So that is a bit about me.
Okay, and next slide. Eric is the CEO of Secret Level, which is killing it in the generative AI filmmaking space and a lot of other great work. I'll let you introduce yourself, but also an amazing muse and a great individual. Next slide for the work.
Just to give a little bit of background, I actually started as a journalist in the 90s, and so I was a field journalist for ABC and then caught the digital bug. I went into visual effects for a bunch of years, working on big feature films 20-something years ago. Sin City, Spider-Man 2, that kind of thing, and then ultimately I caught the interactive bug along the way. And have now produced, I think, over 1,000 hours worth of XR content of various types. I think I've done 100 and something concerts, Post Malone, Jack Harlow, Bad Bunny. I think I produced 300 and some odd games, NBA, and a bunch of others. So yeah, well over 1,000 hours worth of XR content. And now I lead an AI studio. Most of our work is linear, it's film, TV, but we do have a couple big interactive projects and XR projects we're teeing off, and so it's kind of fun to see all those worlds start to collide.
So some great minds here together, and we're going to get their thoughts across kind of three different pieces today. We're going to talk about great creative work, great creative process, and creative people. But I want to start with just a quick thought around just setting the groundwork around the evolution of creativity. And it's really built on this notion that over time we've seen this compression of creative tools. And as new creative tools are really being introduced, to the creative community, to other artists, essentially they have a similar pattern that we've observed where they take the process and in some ways accelerate that process and compress that process. Sort of in the process, along the way, they're making it more accessible, more affordable. If you think about print, sort of prior to that, there were these monks, oftentimes, that were part of the scriptoria, and it would take a year or oftentimes longer for them to transcribe a single book. And they were oftentimes commissioned by a very select group of people or educational institutes. And along came the movable type, the printing press, and that changed. And books and writing was available to exponentially more people. The audience grew, and the amount of people who could actually express themselves grew. And the same thing happened again with film, as we saw us moving from actually making a portrait out of oil and moving toward actually taking a photograph. We saw the same sort of opening up and accessibility of visual expression happening, and also more people being able to have a portrait of their family sort of over their fireplace. And then, of course, around video. There's a great talk from Dan Shapiro. He just spoke at AI on the Lot. He's like a strategist and advisor in this space, but talking about this disruption that digital video really has had. But we moved from what was traditionally a very expensive process, having very expensive cameras, going into a dark room, and then moving over to, again, another step change in accessibility and compressing this process and opening it up. So I would argue that in some ways that's what we're seeing today with AI, is that it's a compression of a process and opening it up and democratizing sort of access to tools and the affordability of these tools in creative expression. So thoughts from us on that notion as we head into some examples of this?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I have a lot of thoughts in this regard. I think, I don't know how much it actually applies to XR so much, but I think AI is a level playing field. I think there's a phrase that's I've heard bandied about. It's tool parity, and that previously a creative process was really mastery of a tool, whether it's Photoshop or a camera or whatever. And AI is actually eliminating the need for mastery or reducing what it means to be a master. Because now you can just tell the AI what you want it to do, and it replicates the mastery in many ways. And so what that does is bring the gates down, the walls down, and allows people that don't have the 10,000 hours to quote Malcolm Gladwell, to now partake in creative. And so I think it's actually going to open up the floodgates of creativity. People that couldn't, for practical reasons, because of life or whatever, or access or remote regions, are now going to be able to make their masterpiece.
Kind of, would you say film in some ways kind of did that?
Film did that. I think all of these did this in levels. I think AI, just to answer the question, AI does that at such a scale that's just slightly, not slightly, very different. But
where's the mastery remain then?
It's definitely compressed, but it's also in its compression expanded it greatly. I think that's the interesting thing about this process. Yes, we've got AI, but that is also giving us this huge tool to get the floodgates open of how many different combinations we could possibly try. So yes, on a compression, but then anyone who's been playing with ChatGPT or looking at AI characters, it's like the storytelling process just got blown apart in a fantastic way.
Yeah, just a little color. Like, I actually think these tools, AI specifically, puts the lens back on human uniqueness. Talent, taste, a sense of the zeitgeist, and then the tools just allow you to manifest that. But it actually puts the value back on the human.
Yeah, I mean, adding to that, I think one thing that's super interesting about just how quickly you can create with AI is that I kind of find myself like missing some of the friction in the creative process. There are times when I need to get something done, or I have a very clear idea and I want AI just to execute for me, and it saves me a ton of time. I don't have to Photoshop celebrities' heads onto other people's bodies like I used to have to in all my decks and stuff like that, and that's great. But when I'm wrestling with a concept or thinking about a copy line that's like not quite right, you know, ChatGPT will tell me how great I am every time, you know, I ask it to. It's pretty good at that. But when I work with humans, you know, you have that experience of like, oh, no, that's not quite right. Like, how can we like push on that? And I think that friction like makes one the work better, but it also makes me better as a creative person. Like, yeah, it wasn't perfect. I need to figure out another way. So I'm always kind of interested in is like, how can I use AI to like, one, get things done super quickly, but then maybe build in some of that friction that I was missing from that process.
And because we were talking the other day about how we all, as creators, have become developers in a way, because we now don't pass off a lot of this stuff to different people who had different job titles. We need to understand how that bit works, how it plugs into there, what the visual output would be, what the glitches are. Okay, let's try it again. Like, we are in that whole process now, which is a complete shift.
Well, speaking of the process and the tools, and you know, Eric, you said, I'm not sure how much of this applies to XR. It's interesting to think through that lens because we are here at AWE. So if you go to the next slide, you know, there are innumerable tools every single day, not only appearing and coming onto the stage for us to utilize in the creative process, but they're also changing exponentially. It's this sort of horse race around, you know, Gemini popping up, and you saw, you know, VO3 just the other day is mind-boggling, you know, and the leap from VO2, or what Runway's doing, or Midjourney. But there are also interesting tools that sort of are in the news less, but they're equally mind-blowing, like World Labs, where they're, you know, they're taking a 2D single image and then manifesting a 3D world out of that, you know, turning it into 3D. And so some of these tools start to speak very directly toward where we're stepping into XR, and where we can imagine a lot of our creativity coming to life within wearables or within a VR environment. And some of them are more upstream, you know, like 11 Labs, or even, you know, ChatGPT and OpenAI. These are some of the tools, and so I think the question for all of you is, which tools are you using? What are your thoughts around those tools? And kind of what does your process look like? I think a lot of folks here in the audience, I'm sure many of you are creatives and developers and people wanting to build. And so give us a peek into your own way of building. And maybe we'll start on that and start with Bob.
Yeah, well, one example from the XR world is that my team at Electric Factory and I are building an experience in the city of San Francisco where you can walk around a specific neighborhood and start to peel back some of the layers of history. So you really get a better sense of the world around you. And we're relying on a lot of historical photographs of the neighborhood, like Gold Rush era. And that's been super fun, but obviously there are no 3D models of those buildings that existed in those times. So we're using tools like Rodan is a good one. I don't know if you guys have used that one, that can go image to 3D. So then we can start placing 3D models out into the real world, and wearing spectacles, we can then jump into this experience and have a really fun time learning about our city. And I think like that's an example of, we know what we want to do, we have a clear idea, so we can just start plugging our ideas into these tools, and they can give us step back that we can prototype with really quickly. So that's one that wasn't on this slide, but I think as we think about XR, going from idea to reality to prototype, those kinds of tools are super helpful.
I tend to have 3 work frames at the moment. One is for rapid prototyping, to your point, and that's to its side. The other is for video generation and helping some startups with internal Gen A workflows to get that going. And then the other one, which I feel like we'll touch a lot on, is really in this AI character, agentic AI, like what needs to happen there. And within those 3 workflows, it is a little bit of like a moving Jenga. Like you're trying, you don't just have one for video, it really depends, and you got to think about, because we get distracted by, there's so much to play with, as a creative, you've got to keep coming back to, where do I really want this work to land, and what is going to help me do the best job for the idea? Because we can go like this and find a new thing, and it made it look like this, but is that true to exactly what the output is and where that creative idea needs to land? I think we've got to be quite disciplined, because there's too much candy to play with. Yeah.
Maybe that's as Eric, you mentioned, the taste piece. That's where that comes to play. Is, you know, there's a lot of talk about being replaced in some ways, and I don't think that's what you're describing. I mean, you know, it's really important for humans to be in the process.
We actually think it's more and more glaring kind of every day, because these tools are just, I mean, by definition, they're trained on the past and derivative data. And so something truly novel is not going to come out of them. It's just kind of by definition of how they're built. And so that novelty has to come from a human mind. Mashing them up. I mean, in essence, all human creativity is also mashup. But there's this what we call the sense of the zeitgeist. What's popular now or important? What's the framework in the proposal or RFP you're trying to? And so none of these tools have any sense of that, any sense of the now, right? And so I think that's a really crucial thing to keep in mind. In terms of workflow, that's adapting every day too. And I also have this precarious position where I get to manage it, but I'm not hands-on as much as my team. Because I have kids, I have 22-year-old kids coming out of school, and they're just masters. It's crazy what they're doing because they're just able to work and native and go between all these tools. But we are seeing kind of a rise of, I wouldn't say new specialists, because I actually think this is the world of the generalists now. A really good generalist that can play with all these tools can just do magic. And so what we're seeing is kind of new classes though, and so building off of some of their processes, we got a whole previous team. They're just good at rapid prototyping, look dev, world dev, what is it ultimately going to look like? And then we still do a lot of work just in images, because that's where you can iterate fastest and really lock that in. So we've found that there's a certain skill just in image gen. It's sort of the art director's eye, could just really nail a look. And once something is locked in images, then we go into video, go image to video, and we've learned that's a different skill set. And it's all about human aesthetic. Those people have a better sense for muscle movement or physics or lighting and shadow. And so that's different than an art director's eye, kind of. And so that's and so we're kind of seeing new sort of skill sets arise with these things.
I mean, one thing I'll add to that is I think a lot about, and maybe because I'm old, I think a lot about the original kind of web experiences we had, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And I think about something like Blogger, for example, right, which was just a platform that let people kind of share any idea that they wanted to. And I think when it comes to XR, we're starting to get more of that kind of thing. But generally, it's difficult for anybody to build something immersive. And I think until we start letting just regular folks, we're all pretty deep in the creative world, so we know how to make things. But once we start letting regular folks who are not creative, who are not in the industry, but start to express themselves spatially, we'll start to get more ideas. We'll start to get a broader diversity of ideas. And I think for stuff like that, just learning how to code or just asking ChatGPT to write code for you is just mind-blowing. So you can pretty much get something going in A-Frame on Glitch or something incredibly easily. And I would love to see more tools that let people bring immersive things to life more easily. I know Snap is just doing some stuff with just making an effect from a prompt. But we need more of that stuff so people know how to make this stuff.
And Canva Code that came out a couple of weeks ago that does that, where they were showing the breadth of ages all the way through of just, I want to make an app that tracks my time doing this, and then there's a 12-year-old kid, which is terrifying and exciting, just making an app like that within a few minutes. Holy shit, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of making things, our next slide, our next topic is around the expressions that come from that. It's cool to hear the process from all of you, and I think you kind of all come at it from a different perspective. Eric, with a studio model where a lot of times studios are building workflows sort of at the middle of this that are pretty proprietary. One document for all of you to sketch down is fbrc.ai. I love that PDF they put out. It's getting a little long in the tooth, but it's a really nice overview of a lot of what we're talking about. But let's talk about creative expressions. And, we can see all sorts of examples on here that span different ways into this intersection between XR and AI. For example, World Labs, that one moving in the middle, the wreath, is an example of that generative 3D worlds that came out of a single 2D image. Or NeoFables, kind of in the bottom left, is an example of building a world in VR. That's an experience that lives on Quest, and you can go through the experience and using your voice generate your own VR world. Or Evertrail is a pretty recent example of crowdsourcing a generative story. This is within a Twitch server, and by having a conversation with others, it then generates a the image you see, but your plan is to move toward video and sort of real-time rendering and dynamic rendering of imagery from all sorts of LLMs. There's that guy holding that weird camera, that's the Paragraphica. I love referencing this one. This is some guy out of Sweden who made this amazing, what they call context-to-image tool. So it's a physical camera, but it uses the context of a location or whatever you're sort of taking a picture of to generate prompts. You can then use dials on the camera to change and manipulate what you're seeing, and then that then generates imagery as if you were taking a picture at a spot, but you're not. It's actually generating it. And then, of course, that bottom right-hand corner is from the recent Google I/O presentation around their wearables, but the same thing's happening for Meta and others, where they're really tapping into some pretty everyday use cases to think about how augmented objects can actually be part of our experience in the world. So those are just some on this slide, but let me pass the mic around. Maybe, Eric, we'll start with you this time. And what are some things that come to mind in this space? And this represents immersive experiences, generative storytelling, and essentially new form factors. Some things that come to mind for you.
I think workflow is a big challenge for us, I think, right now, in terms of like unified teams or distributed teams. AI is very cumbersome right now because you've got 50 different logins, and Sora doesn't talk to VO, and so there's we talked about the project management tax, and AI is quite high right now. So we're brewing a lot of tools that are kind of figuring that out. But one thing we're committed to is we actually think prompting needs to kind of go away in a weird way, because I think there's this idea that a prompt is like 2 or 3 sentences. Well, our prompts are like 10 paragraphs. Like they're massive prompts. And so then, when you kick off a project with like 10 artists, you start off not knowing what the prompts should be. Like you've got a lead character and a lead location, and maybe it's a couple plot elements. And we start doing A/B testing amongst the artists. All right, you write it that way, you write it that way, and then the person that gets the best prompt, then everybody else copies and pastes that prompt. And so you start cross-pollinating A/B testing prompts to get what we call the canonical prompt. And so then we end up with like a prompt like spreadsheet base. And so it becomes very cumbersome at scale, is just kind of a short version of that. And so what we want to do, and we're starting to build tools, is we want to agentify it, to use another buzzword. So we just speak to it. And you just tell it, I want the staff sergeant to marshal his troops and whatever, instead of typing it all out. It will type it out. We're just going to kind of hide that layer. And then the creative director will go, well, that one rendered well, and let's like star that one. And so then the system will know to make that the canonical prompt. And so we're trying to like add kind of a layer, because we think once you start taking prompting at a larger scale, it creates a lot of friction.
Yeah. Well, but what are some, on the other end of that, what are some projects and experiences that you can point to, either from your own selves or ideally even from others, that the audience would be interested in checking out, that you think are starting to push the needle on this intersection between AI and XR?
There's one that I fell in love with last week, and that is, it took out the big award in the Cannes Immersive category, and it's called From Dust. And I would encourage you to have a look. It's a VR experience, but you can see some footage that they've got from in-headset filming, and they're sharing it. It is beautiful, and they've gone all in on a self-directed opera experience where you walk around, and as soon as you arrive in the space, it's dark, but you can interact with it to make it exactly how you want it to be. It has 5 AI characters that are opera singers that will tailor their singing to what you want, and it's just beautiful. And you feel like you are a co-creator, and I think that's the big shift in storytelling. As creatives, we were trained back in the day to always do a script that was a linear story from A to B, and that is an immersive, that's out the window. And then I think there's taken a lot of brands who do collaborations with creators a while to understand. It's like, hang on, someone can walk into the brand idea and go in any direction, and I can't control it. Like, yeah, you have no control. And you just see their pupils dilate, and the IP lawyers are like, what? That's a whole nother talk. But they have crafted something really beautiful. They've thought about the human in it. They've thought about how this person is going to feel. And it's a whole new set of creative skills to learn how to train our AI characters to not feel creepy and to feel like a safe space to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about this panel is we're here talking about immersion, and we're at AWE, and I think as an industry, we kind of, when we go immersive, we kind of crank up the immersion to like 10 a lot of the times, where we're in full VR or we're building features that probably most of the world has no idea how to even really understand or to use. And so in my work, a lot of the times, I'm trying to think of like, what is the minimum immersion level I can give to somebody so they can step into an experience and have a good time and maybe learn something about a brand or just enjoy themselves. And like, you know, I built one example called Hemming Weather, where you can pick up your phone and you can dial a number and you can get a weather report with real-time data read about your location in the voice of Ernest Hemingway. So it's silly and it's kind of stupid, but what I think is immersive about it is just by picking up a phone, I'm kind of like transporting myself into a new frame of mind, and I'm kind of doing something weird. And so that's the kind of immersion like that I'm really interested in. There was another one in one of the earlier slides, a project that I did that takes NBA shot chart data, which is generally like X's and O's on an image. It's pretty flat and not interesting visually. But with Spectacles, I can overlay that data onto any basketball court in the world. So I can go and I can step out and I can see where Michael Jordan made all of his shots in the flu game, which for me as a basketball player is amazing. And I can like go brick all of my layups when he would have made them. But like that kind of like, it's not overwhelming. It's just like a little bit of visual information on top of the world. I feel like is a really, maybe feels like a baby step for us in the industry, but for people is a lot and kind of enough, you know?
Kind of building on that, I think the future's gonna be really, really fun, because I tend to think of this as kind of on a spectrum of immersion. And so you got the in-headset experience into your point with the phone, and there's immersive theater, and then, you know, everybody's heard about like the sphere. And so I just think of these as like a continuum of immersion, and I think that's gonna be an increasingly sought after consumer experience. And so I think picking up these skills and these tools is going to be increasingly important. But I would give a shout out to the Wizard of Oz experience. I don't know if you've seen any, like, it's incredible. Like, the Sphere is like, so the Sphere in Vegas, their feature film debut is going to be the Wizard of Oz, and they've reformatted it for the Sphere. And you'll see the original film kind of projected in the front, in the middle, and they've used AI to expand the world. Like fully expanded, and then they've used it also to recreate every frame. It's not even actually the original film, but they've accurately recreated every frame because they had to train models, the Lion Man and the Tin Man, and so it is a pixel for pixel recreation. It looks like it, but it's actually not it. And because they had to, and then they did the world expansion, and it's like a marvel.
Wow.
It's
I mean, one more thing, just like we're default in 2025 immersed in the internet. Like we are surrounded by it at all times. And so like whether or not we realize that, or what kind of levels of, how does that manifest itself? Like as a creative person, it's amazing because there's so many different ways to bring that to life. You could step into the Sphere, or you could just have like a cool audio experience. Like it could be anything.
Yeah, building on that, I actually think, we've been talking about the metaverse for the last, 5 years. I think we're in the metaverse. I think it's just a slider on how immersive you are. It's like, and so I think, I think the collision of digital and physical are just becoming more and more seamless.
Yeah, there's so many great examples of that collision between them. There's a great event that happens here also in LA, the Next Festival. I saw Karen there last time, and they're kind of two sides of the coin between AWE and them, and you saw with that announcement from Meow Wolf recently, and like these things starting to come together more. What are some of the lessons that we can learn from a Sleep No More, from an escape room, and other physical experiences that get translated? What kind of affordances are there that you guys feel are important that you consider when you're building your own content?
Yeah, I'll start with that. I'm glad you mentioned Sleep No More, because I saw that maybe 6 or 7 years ago, prepared to just hate it. I was like, this is going to be so dumb, and I loved it. It was like, it kind of transformed me in a way, and I think one of the things that I remember about that was, the agency to kind of like stroll around and do my own thing, and then I had a couple like really weird experiences that I didn't expect, and so I think that kind of goes back to my point before, is how do we build something that feels right for each person? Like that experience felt right for me, and it surprised me in ways, but it let me kind of like be in charge of it. And that's fundamentally a superpower of, the augmented world. So I think starting there and starting with reality as a baseline, and then just adding levels and layers of information and entertainment creates something magical, and it could be different for each person.
Yeah, I think those layers of information become really fascinating for me when I think about wearables. One of the things that I feel has always been a hindrance is people don't want to wear a computer on their face. I mean, as much as we love Quest, and we all were, we all been there, we worked there, worked on that. But as we move toward form factors that are sort of lighter weight, the possibilities become very different. And I personally, one thing that I get obsessed about is what type of information or what type of signal can you get from experiences in your real-time just life, everyday life, that start to manifest. That's why I love that Paragraphica, and I think about, sort of wearable devices. The definition of storytelling and content feels like is evolving because of that.
Yeah, and it's creating for the unexpected, right? That's the world that we're living in now. And the big thing about some of these experiences is being able to be flexible and fluid when you're working through it, because you're going to discover things that might glitch or not work, and you've got to be ready on the fly. You'd know that from a production point of view, to take that information and make it better as fast as you can and not wait for too long. Because if you wait for too long and there's something in there that's glitching and you lose a whole lot of people, they're usually not coming back. You get one chance to really move as quickly as you can to make it a perfect experience. And that's exciting and scary, but great.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, it's just something I was kind of like queuing off something I think you said a little bit earlier. I always have to remind myself that we're kind of like, I don't want to say the elite, but we're like the 0.1% of people that have experienced or produced this stuff. And so I always do it like the bar check. You go to a local bar and, have you ever done VR? Kind of thing. And no, like almost, like it's very few people. And so I always have to just remind myself of that. And so it's something you said, like, I think the level of immersion, I don't want to assume much or assume the minimum. And I think of this with some of these immersive interactive stories, that's also new to a lot of people. And so I want to give them the ability to opt into greater levels of story or interactivity, but not assume it, if that makes sense.
Dude, when I did that basketball thing, I had to take my spectacles to like my gym where I play basketball all the time, and I was like out there wearing those things, like shooting hoops, and people were like weirded out, rightly so. But like it was an opportunity for me to like have a conversation with people who do not interact with technology. And people were like, what the heck are you doing? And I could just have them try it, and they were like, oh wow, this is like pretty cool. Like they would never have understood it or definitely thought it was weird, but then just having that experience of slapping those things on and being like, oh yeah, it actually is pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, another big gate I feel like we've had has been the branching narrative that is often required for storytelling or any kind of experience. And up until 3 years ago, it had to really be hard-coded. And if you wanted to create a choose-your-own-adventure, King's Quest, Space Quest, Zork kind of experience, you really had to define all of the possible outputs. And it's exciting to think we're now, as you said, like prepare for the unexpected. Like parameters and conditions can be defined that can then manifest an experience and content based off of signal, as opposed to the all being predefined. Has anybody aware of for example, just one example of this, but the Odyssey ML project from Ed Catmull, who's one of the founders of Pixar, that type of experience that we're going to start to see more and more of, where we're, like that's literally generating the next frame in real time dynamically as you move through the space. So I get really excited about that kind of thing.
Yeah, and giving AI some expertise is also interesting. Like, are any fans of retrieval augmented generation in the audience? There, we got one. Hey, So this
Old RAG.
Yeah, RAG. So RAG is cool because you can basically connect an LLM, which is very general, to a specific body of work, and you can have the LLM search through that body of work before it gives you a response, right? So like that's really interesting. And I think, I recently built a project that helps me find something to watch, like movies to watch, based on a catalog of descriptions of all those movies. So I can ask my bot for comedies, it can look through the library and give me like a very good answer. And so like that kind of thing doesn't rely on the LLM to like know what the heck it's talking about, because frankly it doesn't. But it allows it to reference something that as a creative person you can specify. And that gives like a way richer experience to the user because it's not just a bunch of made up BS.
I just wanted to say something quickly, which is, on that note, as creatives in this room, can we also please use AI to make our lives easier so we have more time to be creative? I've seen creators burn out at the cusp of all new technology. When Horizon Worlds came out, all the creators were burning out because we're addicted to the race of something new. And right now we're in a space where we have all these tools, and this is incredible, but please make sure to make yourself something that makes your life easier so you can do some more work, because I think we forget that. And that is what is available to us right now as well.
Where I'm excited, and this is more speaking as kind of a former gamer, I guess, but if you're tracking what GTA 6 is doing, it's just incredible. So GTA, for those that haven't played, are usually these big open virtual worlds. You could go around causing mayhem. And they've always been very rich, though. There's little sub-stories and little plots. If you want to talk to the NPCs, you get lost in these plots. But they've always been sort of surface level. Each NPC has like 1 or 2 lines of dialogue or whatever. They're now creating an entire dynamic world. So all the NPCs have love lives. They have work and day nights. They'll be at the club at night. And then it's completely dynamic. And then they'll fall in love. They'll get rivalries. They'll break up, and they might steal your car. And so I'm just like, that's awesome. Like, sign me up. And I mean, who knows how much that they actually deliver on, but that's kind of where they're going. And they have the pocketbooks to do that, but that's crazy. The level of dynamism and like reactive, this is the phrase of eminent storytelling, right? It emanates from the user interactivity.
Even Mario Kart is an open world now. So that's wild.
Yeah. No, this brings up the topic of world building. Which is kind of a catchphrase I'm hearing a lot. I had a great conversation just this week with someone who's convinced that kids these days don't like stories, and that was spiritually offensive to me personally. And I asked my son, who's 12, and he said, "No, I like stories. There's just no good ones out there. Like he'll binge watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine or other shows, but he's craving that." And this other person, though, their theory was that there's a new form of storytelling that's essentially, setting the parameters of a world, and then letting that take form for you to experience. And undoubtedly, that's a valid experience to go through and see what that's like. But what's the role of story in that? Is it in these little mini stories with the NPC characters? Is it in the larger purpose and vision of the world? Where do you guys see the author's voice coming through in a world-building experiment?
Depends on the idea and where it has to land and what is the best thing for that idea. So it's interesting with world building and hearing about the younger kids going in. I feel like there are ideas that will work so well around discovery, because if you get to discover something and solve something that you are steering, I don't know the scientific version of this, but I'm pretty sure that helps you embed it in your long-term memory. Like you were a part of it. You were a part of that story, and that's what's going to help go in there. So for me, it's always going to be what is the best way to bring that idea to life, even in world building, because there's so many ways you can build a world. And I mean, now we are obviously skipping some steps where you can use AI to generate a template and you can build upon that. So it's always going to be about the idea.
Yeah, I come back to thinking about like the quality of these worlds. And it is like you mentioned your kids binging shows. Like I'm super excited to see my kids binging Lord of the Rings books And that's not a parent flex, Eric. I'm not flexing on you right now, but I'm just saying.
Better parent than
my
me,
kids
Bob.
my kids like to read,
always known this.
which is great. Just one form of entertainment. That's all. That's my point.
No judgments.
No, nothing at all.
Judgments.
But like those books are just doesn't get any more like quality than that. And I think in the rush to make so many things, and we have so much potential to make anything we can dream up. Like, how do we make sure that there is stuff that's good enough to watch or good enough to read?
I think that's exactly it. I think there's this weird myth that gets thrown around that like, mediums replace one another. And it's just not, if you actually track the data, it's just not true. We multitask like we've never have. We're actually in peak vinyl right now is one factoid I love. Like we always think it's like in the 60s or 70s. More vinyl is produced and sold and played today than ever before.
Thank you. That's so true.
And also books. You don't buy them at Barnes & Noble, you buy them at Amazon, but books are produced and read today than ever before. So there's this weird myth, this newness myth that, TV's dead and film's dead. It's not true. Like
DVDs will take over theater.
yeah, the biggest box office weekend of all time was last Thanksgiving. So it's just not true. What it is, and this is queuing off what Bob's saying, is it's what's the most valuable thing I can do this minute in terms of like entertainment and using my time. And TikTok's the default because I don't have time to get into a documentary and that movie was boring, and so I'm gonna be on TikTok. it's the value per second or value per minute is higher there. But if you do give them a movie that they enjoy, they will commit. And so Minecraft right now is blowing up, the Minecraft movie, right? So it's a value per minute proposition, not a medium versus medium proposition.
I love that. You got to scream that from the rooftops that, as creatives, it's encouraging to note that, books are still being read, vinyl's still being listened to. And by the way, Bob, my son's writing a book. And so that's all happening right now. So as creatives, I think it's encouraging. So this leads to the next, kind of one of the last slides. We've been on this one for a while, around creative people and imagining, where this is headed to. And to your point, Eric, a lot of people that have been in the traditional entertainment space, whether they're filmmakers or writers or whether they're developers, what is their role in the future and what does that look like for them? Are they truly being replaced by AI or is it evolving? Tell me your thoughts on the future of the industry across both traditional entertainment and books and film, but also as we look at immersive experiences. Anyone can start with this
I'll
one.
just start with I think you'll have some great insight on as far as filmmakers go. My one's just on seeing the change in creative roles that are even being put out into the industry. So it feels like there's a pull between two things. One is hyper niche, where I'm seeing roles like, for the first time, Gen AI specialist, creative specialist in marketing performance. I'm like, whoa, that is a tight role. And then I'm seeing a pull on the other way, which is creative directors, but doing everything in that mix. And so I feel that at the moment, that's what I'm seeing from a job position point of view, which is super interesting.
I guess I answered this question a little prematurely earlier, is my view in that I think that's the great leveling in terms of like access and ability to be creative. I think to be a creative has been a very elite group historically. And so I think these tools are allowing a greater cross-section of humanity to like partake and produce. And I'm going to use one, it's not an XR project, but the Coca-Cola spot that we're known for. We produced the first Coke campaign to use AI. It went viral back in December, and it sparked this global debate. And it was really interesting to partake. But one of the pieces of feedback we kept getting was it was soulless, right? And we're like, what does that mean? And it was because this sort of preconception that the AI made it, and it was just not true. Like the core team on that project was a group in Dakar, Senegal, and they poured every ounce of passion they had into it. Because when else were they going to do a Coke spot? Never before in history would Coke go to Dakar, Senegal, and hire a team, right? So through this technology, they were able to like bring world-class skills to bear. I think the soulless comment was it was actually the viewer's bias, not actually in the project, because it had as much soul as any other animated project that I could think of. So,
yeah, I mean, I think the floor has been raised, right, in this crazy way where anybody can make something of a high-ish level in not a lot of time. And so I think that's something that when I talk to my teams or other folks in the creative business, like there's never been a better time to make something. So I think if we can expand, we see some auteurs on this slide here, but like in 2025, that is a picture of many, many, many more people.
Yeah.
And so I think there's never been an easier way to take that weird idea you had, whatever it's for, and just go make it. You can publish a book if you want. You can make an AR effect in a half an hour. You can do whatever the heck you want. So just go and do it,
Yeah, and sorry, so many thoughts on this one, but the flip side of that, the flip side of greater access is greater responsibility too, in that there's no more excuses. There's no such thing as writer's block anymore. There's just none. If you are struggling with something, go to ChatGPT for half an hour. It's going to spit out 300 versions. And so writer's block is dead. You don't need to master Photoshop. You don't have to master camera. There's no excuses to just producing or just creating now. And so that's the inverse of the access. Now that a kid in Dakar, Senegal can make, you in Fresno, no excuse. So it sort of levels it. And so, procrastination and just hesitation are the big enemies now.
I mean, I love that as a good takeaway from our panel, is that, if my kid can write a book that Bob's kid can read, that you guys have no excuses and we should all be out there building and creating, I myself coming from less of a build, more of a writing background, I've always had to collaborate in order to do a film or tell a story. And then now with the tools, I'm able to do sort of the whole workflow from my living room. Or on the other hand, I'm able to create a project where it's a collaboration, with a lot of other artists and other folks. I was talking to someone from the indie film space who was saying it's fascinating that AI can actually do the shots that have traditionally been impossible for indie film, like a Russian crane shot on the top of the Himalayas. But the shots that have actually been very cheap and easy, like two people talking in a cafe.
We say this all the time.
Right?
I can make Lord of the Rings today,
Right?
but putting a Sandra Bullock rom-com together is not possible.
Right? It's a fascinating sort of turn. And so there's a role there for some really interesting collaboration and hybrid models creating in different ways and using the tools in those ways. Wouldn't you?
Collaboration and accessibility, that's what it's kind of blown apart. One of the other things I've liked seeing is documentary makers who may not have massive budgets can now use AI to help recreate a whole lot of historic footage. And that's cool. There was a whole startup that was at South by in Austin this year that just focuses on historic AI footage to help documentary makers. I was like, that's so great. I love that.
The one part that hasn't changed, though, just in terms of people, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience, whether you are independent or whether you work at a small studio, the economics are important to you. And the piece that has not really changed at all is how you monetize creativity. You're either, selling a ticket to a person that's actually, taking money out of their pocket and handing it to you for your work, or they're watching a commercial, advertising, and then you're monetizing their eyeballs in that way, or they're actually, buying a product for something that then pays you. How do you guys imagine, I know this is a little left field, we didn't talk about this, but I'm curious, just because I know people probably think about it, what are your thoughts on the different ways to actually build a living around creativity?
Yeah, I think you've got to kind of be your own biggest fan. And I think you have to put your work out there in a way that people can see so that you can demonstrate your enthusiasm for a space so that people who do need to hire you or who want to have you make something for them can see it. I don't think it's enough to be a person at a company and kind of just be that. I think you have to be your own company and put yourself out there in ways that may be uncomfortable.
I agree. If they can't see it, they can't buy it, right? And we're seeing that now. Everyone's just so visible, even with your opinions on what things you should be using and what you're exploring and what you're experimenting with. I mean, you've been fantastic at that, sharing a lot of your experiments, and people love to see that because you're in there playing with all the different tools, and of course people are going to engage with that. Yeah.
It's awkward. It feels awkward to do, but like you do have to do it.
Yeah.
What about from a studio perspective?
We talk about it all the time because there's like, again, sort of a manifestation of all the access. There's increasing competition. Like yes, we got out there in front, but there's a new shop popping every day that we're tracking. So we're very aware that this is going to get become a very crowded marketplace, and when it's crowded, prices go down, right? So we talk about it all the time. How do we, figure out like a direct-to-public market? Because right now we're lucky we have a lot of great brand and enterprise partners, but is there a direct-to-consumer path for us down the line and through social media or making our own content and charging for it in some ways? Like one model that we're playing, it was probably, I doubt many people have even heard of, like there's these vertical, what they call them K-dramas, because they came out of Korea, and there's these paid, it's like 3-minute episodes, right? And you get the first one free, and then it's like a microtransaction model, and it's $1 each for the rest, and so that's $20 for, and it's blowing up all across Asia, and they're expecting maybe that'll come here as a sort of a Quibi, like a follow-on, and we've had multiple war rooms like, what's our K-drama?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's exciting in the future to see as much as we can and hopefully find ways to sustain it. If we go to the last slide, thanks to this crew, we have about 5 minutes left or 3 minutes left. So if there's any, we could probably take 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, please.
As humans, we're embracing technology and how that's shifting the way that we behave and the way that we even perceive ourselves, how we relate to the world. And so I'm really curious, what have you learned about the ways that technology is shaping human behavior that you're bringing to your work and the way that you think about how you're making, what you're making, why you're making it?
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned really quickly is that people are very skeptical of AI, and I talked about that idea of like finding movies to watch. I shared that with a group of cinephiles on Reddit, and people were like, "Oh, I hate AI, but I would use it for this." So I think if we're building simple, easy things that make their lives better, then connect them to the things they're interested in, that's great. But there is a heavy degree of skepticism across the board for people who are not maybe in our industry.
I would say the vulnerability and the fumbles of being human should come through in the work that we create. Now, not obviously for a polished film where everything has to be perfect, but in a lot of these other experiences, I'm constantly thinking about how do we not lose those beautiful little mistakes that we make as humans, because when we start erasing and polishing that out, then things really do start to feel synthetic and plastic. Those things are so important to hang on to. So when you're working on something and you think it was a little bit of a glitch, hang on to that. That could be the one part that draws people in, that people fall in love with your idea about. So I'm always not trying to scrap out the perfection, which is weird as a creative director coming from an advertising world, because we were always taught to do that. Now in AI, I think it's hold on to that. Just hold on to it.
I think there's a version of that I've been tracking. I think as a society we've over-indexed on algorithms and procedurally generated content or agendas kind of forced upon us, and so you're actually seeing it with Gen Alpha, which is basically high school kids. They're rejecting the algorithms. They're both, well, it's actually kind of a nuanced argument. They're the masters and the skeptics at the same time. They know how to use it, but they know they're being algorithms, so they know to tune it out. So, and so what that does is it brings up this notion, and sort of queuing off what you're saying, is I think as a society we've over-indexed on pixel perfection and whatnot, and you're seeing Gen Alpha really go after more of emotional authenticity, They'd rather have it look slightly ugly or slightly lo-fi, but it really resonate with them. And that's social media, right? That's just social media, warts and all, but it resonates on some emotional level. And we're seeing that just play out, where they're going to opt for the thing they connect with over the pretty thing, basically.
Well, thank all of you for coming and packing the house for the greatest panel of AWE.
Of all time.
Thanks to these folks. These are QR codes if you want to connect with any of these amazing minds. And thanks again.
Thank you.